So, of course, there's a lot to be concerned about with this upcoming Trump administration, given who's in office. But I think we also have to remember that a lot of this is already happening.
Absolutely. And we've been hearing the administration say for over a year, oh, this is just about fighting terrorism, just let them, fight the terrorists, finish the job, whatever. And now you see them making incursions into the West Bank where there's no Hamas, they're going into Lebanon. It's just lie after lie after lie. And yeah, I think this next guest will illuminate some of Trump's further plans on some of these fronts.
Yes. And on that note, I would like to introduce to the show again Ashish Prashar. He's a political strategist and former advisor to the Middle East peace envoy. Ashish, welcome back to the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
So, a lot has happened in just the last few days. It's been quite the whiplash. Every day we hear a few new Trump appointees. And I think, the question on everybody's mind is, with the people that we're seeing, whether it's Marco Rubio being tapped for Secretary of State or this Fox News host, is it Pete Hegs? I don't even, his last name is weird. You can clarify that for me.
Yeah.
Who's been tapped to be Secretary of Defense, who's basically like a Christian supremacist end timer who wants to build a third
Mm.
temple over the Al Aqsa Mosque and literally bring about the end times. And a cast of other really disturbing characters, what a former Dick Cheney advisor, and on
Mm.
and on and on. I guess walk us through some of these people, and at the end of the day, what does this mean? Let's start with for the Middle
Mm.
East.
Right. I mean, it's really interesting. I think one thing I'll take a step back for people who are anti-imperial, anti like the US invading every other country in the world, thinking it's an empire can tell us what to do. Nothing changes, right? This is the most important thing. A lot of these announcements are a distraction in the craziness of them, right? But the reality policy doesn't really change, right? We had Bill Clinton call the West Bank Judea and Samaria, like the same way Mike Huckabee calls it Judea and Samaria. There is no like belief system that is different. And anyone he probably would have picked from the Senate and Congress, bar Rashida Tlaib and maybe a couple other progressives, would probably take the same line because most of them have APAC funding in some way, right? So they don't actually have that. The interesting thing also is the consistency of picks, right? So before we get into the foreign policy thing, people are outraged by this border czar, right? Tom Honan, right? But he was Barack Obama's border czar, and he was known as deporter in chief, and he did such a good job of deporting people that Obama awarded him a medal, right? And that's the kind of person that people are outraged that Trump brought into office, forgetting or choosing to neglect the fact that he had already served Democrat presidents before him and had deported a mass amount of people. Now, with regards to the Middle East, right, take Marco Rubio. If he is like officially put in as a Secretary of State role, because I feel like Trump's still playing games with him a little bit, bullying him from the side by not really doing the big announcement the way he has done some of the other individuals he's put in his cabinet. But he is not going to change much that Secretary Blinken has done already, right? We have to remember, just because they don't have the same resumes, take the guy from Fox News, they don't have the same charm. Maybe Blinken plays the guitar better than Rubio and is more quote unquote likable. They still, these guys in office now are as much war criminals as the guys who are psychos coming in Trump's regime, right? Blinken's own grandfather founded the American Palestine Institute and furthered the Zionist colonial project in the Palestine. He was a warmonger before even being in office, right? So he championed the use of force over diplomacy, supported the illegal invasion of Iraq, supported NATO's military intervention in Libya, which is an intervention, which is an invasion, and deposing Gaddafi. And he argued that Obama failed in Syria because he did not use enough force to wipe out Assad's regime. That just because we have a guy with a Crusader tattoo doesn't mean their vision of the Middle East, their depravity in taking lives that are disposable to them is any different just because they play a guitar and have gone to the right school. And I think people need to take a step back to remember that. Now, Rubio specifically, look, he's known for his anti-China policy, and that is really important. Where he thinks he'll have a lot of say, but also you have to consider the other caveat in this room, right? So Trump's transition team is made up of his chief of staff, Susie Wiltz. It's made up of Vance and I think Howard Lutnick. The other person in the room that not many people talk about in the mainstream media right now when they're announcing their outrage is Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk also makes a significant amount of his money from China and electric cars. Do you think someone in Trump's era is going to allow Trump, with all the rhetoric? I'm sure they're going to say things. They're going to say they're going to punish China, talk a good game like they do for a couple of years. But do you think anything's really going to change when one of the biggest investors in Trump's campaign, one of his biggest supporters, and someone, who is in his ear every day is going to allow Marco Rubio to set policy on that? I don't think so. Foreign policy will run through the Trump office and the Trump White House, and his close senior team, but it's not going to go. Marco Rubio is not going to have much say on a lot of that. The one danger area, I think you and me had a conversation offline, which was South America. Rubio will be given a lens to go after different parts of the world that maybe Donald Trump doesn't care about. And that's where he might show his muscle, so to speak. With regards to people like, Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, the big worry for me is we have someone who is basically been groomed by a Hindu nationalist organization to hold our national secrets. It reminds me of British politics recently, where they had Suella Braverman in office and Priti Patel, who were both effectively agents of Israel at one point. Her husband, Suella Braverman, was a Zionist with West Bank property and served in the IDF. How could she be a genuine Home Secretary to the United Kingdom? And Priti Patel was also working for an Israeli tech company and a military contractor when they were in office. So all that doesn't surprise me that conservatives put in people that they don't really care about the intelligence part going to another country that might be equally anti-Islamic, shows that Islamophobia that we have running through our government here in the United States. On Iran, I don't see policy changing that much. Are we going to have a full-on war with Iran? If anything, it will be a tit-for-tat Israel being used as a proxy rather than the United States going all in. Trump, again, talks tough on it. And I do think consent is trying to be made with all these accusations that Iran had tried to assassinate him rather than lone American gunmen. But I don't know if Trump, at least immediately, wants to take on another war, because he's the guy who doesn't want to put American boots specifically on the ground anywhere. And he has talked already about taking American resources out of the Middle East in some other way.
Yeah, his administration or the cabinet picks he's making definitely seem to be intended to send messages to, different countries, China and, Iran, as you mentioned. Obviously, the other one is Israel. And, one of the big topics that's come up is, obviously people in Israel, Israeli officials are celebrating this. And there's been talk that Trump is going to try to bring back the so-called deal of the century, this so-called peace plan for the Middle East. Can you describe to our viewers, what that is, what the significance of that proposed deal was, and what you think might happen on that front?
Right. So the interesting thing for me is, again, it goes back to how there's a consistent thread here and stuff that Biden didn't suddenly overturn because he came into office. Since Donald Trump has won this election, it's been predicted his administration will be far worse than Palestine, far worse for the Middle East. His pro-Israel rhetoric and threats to bomb Iran and his foreign policy, rants at his speeches. But if you look closer, it doesn't differ much, right? It goes that, just because Biden administration was in office, they continued his policies of the Trump presidency. Although there may be surprises in who they put in these roles, or anger that there are raging Zionists in Israel. Again, I go back to Secretary Blinken is a raging Zionist. Just because we have some others that are more outspoken and say it more craftily doesn't make it any different, right? So Biden in his term maintained a lot of Trump's policies, right? Specifically, think about the one that everyone, and you've heard on the campaign talk about. They've compared Biden's genocide to Trump moving the embassy to Tel Aviv, right? From Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, almost accepting Israel's annexation of the Palestinian territories and encouraging more expansion of the illegal settlements. Look, Trump administration offered, economic support in exchange for giving up the political rights to self-determination. That's not going to be taken there, right? While the Biden administration don't say that, their backing of a two-state solution was nothing over this whole 4 years, even up till October 7th last year. As I think one of your previous guests mentioned, there was attacks on the West Bank, attacks on Palestinian communities. settlements popping up left, right, and center, and the Biden administration did nothing. They only have to start talking about it is when Gaza exploded, right? That's when they had to start saying, "Oh, we're going to sanction some people who are doing these horrific crimes in the West Bank." But they didn't really ever change the Trump administration's like not so discreet annexation of the West Bank. Now, Biden didn't close the embassy in Jerusalem, and furthermore, the Biden administration accepted the idea that the future Palestinian state would not enjoy full rights of self-determination or sovereignty. And we know that because Biden administration held the position that Palestinian statehood could only come through direct negotiation between the parties. But Israel refused to ever change its policy, its law, to never accept a Palestinian state, basically, through his entire administration. And the second element is on the Trump-Biden similarities is those Abraham Accords that you're talking about. The first Trump administration initiated a path to normalization with, Morocco, the UAE, Bahrain. The Biden administration vigorously pursued the same path with efforts to normalize Israel and Saudi Arabia. They still are pushing that today as we speak while a genocide is happening. And MBS is always having to make a statement, whether we believe him or not, that he's not going to do this right now because there's an ongoing genocide. But they've been pushing this through this genocide. And based on Trump's proclamations during his campaign and his advisors, donors, and supporters, he'll continue to push that Abraham Accords, basically connecting these countries economically, making sure that they guarantee Palestinian security for better trading and economic rights with not just Israel, but like the United States itself. Now that is dangerous because it inoculates the Middle East. It inoculates any resistance, effectively, to in support of the resistance on the ground, protecting Palestinian people. And you can see that when you're seeing people beg their leaders in their countries right now, from Morocco to Egypt to everywhere else, going, "Why are you not doing anything to protect, our kin?" They've done that job with the Abraham Accords, and I expect the Trump administration to continue to do that to further inoculate the Middle East right now.
It's interesting because it really does seem like this is the best cabinet Miriam Adelson could possibly pay for or buy,
Yeah.
in many ways. I'm curious if I could ask you, Ashish, about the domestic front, because there's also a lot of concern about what this means for pro-Palestine protesters. I mean, just a couple days ago, there was a bill in Congress that didn't pass, luckily, but it was intended essentially to give the president the power to strip any nonprofit of its nonprofit status, essentially bankrupting it if the president decides it supports terrorism, which is like a completely vague thing. And obviously is just giving somebody like dictatorial powers to eliminate their political opposition. And 52 Democrats voted to give Trump those powers. And that's something I think we're going to see more of an attempt of. And I mean, I know someone like Elise Stepanek, who's been appointed to UN ambassador, isn't necessarily going to be having influence over legislation in Congress if she's going to be at the UN. But I mean, she was rewarded for basically going after university presidents and calling everybody anti-Semitic last year. And then now you have Matt Gaetz promoted to Attorney General. I'm not sure, people have different ideas of what his position might be on that. So anyways, given this kind of cast of pro-Israel characters, what do you think that might mean for groups who are pushing back and resisting against the U.S. empire from inside the belly of the beast?
Well, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people will say that a lot of that has started to happen under Biden, right? Already, right? We had the student demonstrations, and there's been one public story, I think, of a student in Cornell who had nearly his visa revoked because Cornell wanted to kick him out, and they were leaving him in the hands of the State Department, effectively, which would have been his deportation. But there have been so many cases behind the scenes of students who participated in peaceful demonstrations on college campuses, reading books and educating themselves on Palestine, who are from different countries, who've not been allowed back, who've not got that media attention, and probably not wanted to get that media attention, frankly, because they're still trying to appeal their visa. The U.S. policy on effectively, not just the Muslim ban, but anyone who participated in these protests is already happening under Secretary Blinken, who's not his State Department is just not renewing people's visas if they've spoken up about Palestine. That is already in effect. Now, whether they pass a big public thing to attack charities, I think most of the protests are decentralized already. I think a lot of people who are on the streets are part of organizations, yes, but they're not all registered charities. There are amazing charities in the United States that are pro-Palestinian and supportive of the Palestinian movement, and obviously they would be impacted by that. But I think we're already operating under the guise that the police are going to come down heavy on people protesting on behalf of Palestinians. We're already operating under the guise that, they're going to use everything possible to threaten people from turning up on the streets, right? If you are on a visa, your life already is at risk, right? People have been reporting people who are like on visas who protested in this under the Biden administration. So they would be, if they got arrested, their visa might be revoked through the last year, right? People have been using billionaires in our country, like Bill Ackman, have been exposing people so their lives would be hell already, and using the police state. That we'll never forget those images from Colombia where NYPD used almost effectively an anti-terror unit to go in there and drag students out, discharging a weapon on site, which never got investigated, with police having things on their phones that have been photographed by a credible journalist in the United States who basically says, "Oh, I hope I kill someone tonight." This is literally what we are living with right now. What Trump is just what Congress is effectively trying to do is make it acceptable. That's maybe quell any doubt that this is going to happen if you step out of line. And it goes back to the point that this duopoly that we live with these two parties, there is one single party. Only America does it really well by having two, so you could pick one and choose which one depending on how you feel every 4 years. That's what we're seeing domestically. Going back about the Miriam Edelson thing, she couldn't have dreamed for a better cabinet, right? They will annex the West Bank. Like, let's just be straight. Trump's not his intent is clear. He's going to annex the West Bank. But the reality is they're annexing it. They've been annexing it, as you know, for the last 8, 10, 12 years, and no president, Democrat or Republican, has really done anything about it. They've kind of let it happen behind the scenes. All Trump does is hold a mirror up to America. So actually, this is who we really are. You don't like the pics that are just saying all this stuff out loud, but this is who we really are. We are annexing. We just say things like two-state solution. His State Department and his defense team will just basically stop the gaslighting part of, like, we believe in two states and Palestinians' right to self-determination. And what that could open up really is, like, it would, for me, watching, what I know through my time in the Middle East envoy's office, is it might lead to finally the toppling of someone like Abbas, who has basically been holding back his people from resisting with his security service the Israeli attempts to throw them out of their land, their homes. Now, once he's gone, maybe there'll be a full-on resistance that will allow to thrive, frankly, to resist the Israeli occupation of their land, that will resist the removal of their children from their homes at night. And that is potentially one weird silver lining that will stop the pretense that America actually gives a damn about Palestinians through policy, and will actually get into what this actually is. Like, this is a full-on occupation. This is a full-on settler colonial project. It has no desire to see a Palestinian in that territory, which would mean everybody can actually pick up a gun and fight if that's what they choose to want to do, or resist in any other means. And maybe people who have been following the American line, maybe in Europe, I think we've mentioned this in the past, where they just need America to keep saying two-state solution because their actual public is genuinely, I think, if you look at what's happening in France and England and Spain and Italy, we're seeing the mass resistance to, stocking Israeli ships, to weapons transfers and everything else. Their public's, only thing that's holding them back is their government keep talking about a two-state solution. Now, if Trump throws that completely out the window, you might see a separation of this European-American hegemony over the Middle East, right? They're going to have to somehow answer that. Now, either they change sides effectively and say we need to defend Palestinians' right to exist in a territory and go head-to-head with America, which I don't believe all of them will be. But a lot of the southern states that have already positioned themselves with arms embargoes might just say, hey, we're done with this. Ireland, countries like that will be done with this. Maybe even France. The UK, I imagine, would follow the US path on this because they just literally do whatever the United States wants. But you're going to see some massive division, which also could jeopardize NATO, which, as you know, has never been Trump's favorite organization in the first place. So there is massive repercussions to the annexation of the West Bank that could ripple through European and international global organizations that America leads policy that could actually open doors for potentially a liberated Palestine through the chaos that it might cause.
Wow, well, that is a lot, that's important to recognize that, in fact, a lot of the things we're so terrified of happening under Trump are already happening, which shows you what a dark world we're in. Ashish, I wanna thank you for coming on and breaking all that down for us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.